Hello and welcome back to WA Real. I'm your host Bryn Edwards. WA Real brings you real and authentic stories from fascinating people here in Western Australia. Stories to inspire and guide you to take action to be all you can be. Today we're going to get into a topic that everyone participates in but doesn't necessarily talk about, and so becomes somewhat of a white elephant in the room at times. Today we're talking with sexologist Emma Stewart. Born in the UK and then emigrated to Australia in 2005, Emma specialises in sex and relationship therapy, pregnancy and birthing, and the sexuality of the birthing experience. She has a master's in sexology with a professional background in consultancy and education, and provides programs, therapy and workshops within a diverse range of clinical and professional settings. And she currently works within her private practice here in Rollestone, WA. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, you like me, born in England,
Yes.
and then came to Western Australia. What was the pull to come to Western Australia?
Okay, this is probably an interesting story.
Yeah.
I never
Was it boys?
wasn't boys.
Right.
It was girls. It was my sister. Yes. So I had never been to WA, knew nothing about WA, and my twin sister wanted to move over here because she'd already lived on the East Coast and wanted to move across, but the point system in the UK,
Yeah.
you have to get a certain amount of points to get into the country, and she didn't have enough points, so I did, and she said, go over, I'll come and join you. So actually the story is about boys, because I came over, waited for her, and then she fell pregnant with a little boy, and decided not to move across, so I ended up here for somebody else, and then they didn't come over, but I wouldn't move. No, I love
You wouldn't move?
No.
What is it you enjoy about living here?
I think for myself it's the people. I really enjoy the people in WA. I love the culture, the environment, the lifestyle. It's great for the kids.
Yeah.
There's everything for me in WA. Yeah, wouldn't move.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, what is a sexologist and what do they do?
So,
Because it's a unique job.
It is a unique job, yeah. So sexology is the academic study of sex and sexuality. It's certainly not a hands-on experience,
Right.
which is often what people interpret it to be. And it's not necessarily about the techniques of sex.
Right.
Obviously, you'll learn about that in the study of sex, but it's not necessarily how to have the best sex in the world,
Right.
and what the best techniques in the world are, or how to do a great blowjob, although
Right.
that's part of it. It's more about the human experience of sex and sexuality. So how our lived experience affects us, in terms of like our culture, society, our physiology, our psychology, how all those influences affect our human experience of sex and sexuality,
Right.
and the diversity within that.
So what would draw somebody to need to come and see you?
Oh, so there's 101 reasons that people will come and see me. So there's the basic couple therapy. So not basic as in simple, but as in that people come because there's a problem in their relationship, and it's usually one that is centering around sex and desire or arousal within the relationship. So a lot of people will come for relationship therapy to address an issue regarding that aspect of their relationship.
Right.
And so that could be addressed through communication skills, psychoeducation, finding out more about sex and sexuality and aging and the diversity of sex and sexuality. Or it could be that we've got differing desires. One of us fancies it, one of us doesn't.
Right.
And how do we work our way through that?
Right. So do you find in those situations that issues in the bedroom are almost like a symptom of things that are going on in the relationship?
Absolutely. I mean, there's lots of reasons.
And then they become...
Yeah, there's lots of reasons why
spiral.
there could be issues in the bedroom, from physical reasons to psychological distress, but also if there is relationship distress, if there is issues within how they communicate, how enmeshed they are within the relationship, how distant they are in the relationship, then that does affect intimacy and desire and arousal as well. So it's quite a complex subject, sexology. It's not straightforward. There's no one answer fits all. It's definitely a delicate exploration of that human being, their human experience, what they actually going through, and how they interrelate with their partner and their world can affect how they have sex, how often they have sex, how they feel about sex, and
must be quite a brave step for a couple. And I'm going to ask you about other reasons.
Absolutely.
But it must be quite a brave step for couples to present themselves to.
Yeah, and it really is. Like sometimes clients will make an initial inquiry even 2 years before they actually come and see me.
Yeah.
Because it's a process for them to actually arrive at my doorstep, and I understand that. And you can see very clearly when people do arrive, they're very nervous about coming to see somebody like myself. You know, they may not have been to see a professional regarding this. They may not have spoken to anybody, including their family, friends, you know, their GP. They may not have spoken to them about a sexual issue. And so they're coming, you know, with trepidation. That's often people's experience. And also often people are quite unsure about what to expect when they come and see a sex therapist or sexologist. You know, what are they going to do? What are we going to talk about? That would be my
next question.
Yeah.
Right? What does I'm sure there's not such a thing as a typical session, but what does a typical session?
Yeah, you're quite right. There is no typical session, but there is, you know, quite a clear structure that you try to maintain within the therapy session.
Just so we're clear, it is a talking session.
Talking session.
Yes.
Any demonstrations will be me with pictures.
Right.
Right. Maybe a model at the most. So it's very much counselling and education and psychotherapy. It's really discussing the issue and finding out strategies, tools, ways in which we can navigate the issue, or most, you know, reduce harm to each other and, you know, ourselves. That's really what it's about. So a typical session would say somebody's coming to me for initial consultation, would be, you know, we would talk through how therapy would work and what their expectations of therapy are, what they want to get out of the experience. We would get some background information about that person. So very often it's really important to find out about their family of origin, what's gone on in their life beforehand, historically, socially, culturally, where they're coming from, so that I can get an understanding of the person, the relationship they have with themselves and others, and then move on to the issue. So the issue itself may not be touched on for some time until we become comfortable, because of course I talk about sex every day, all day.
Yes.
But not everybody does. So everybody has to get quite comfortable in a session, and then we would look at treatment options, and really with sexology the idea is that the client decides what options they would like to go down, what route they'd like to go down, and you're there to facilitate that and give them as much information as possible, but not to determine the outcome of their treatment. For them to be able to take a very clear role in that.
It sounds almost, listening to you, that like couples or others would be presenting themselves almost from, I want to use the word pathology or something wrong basis.
Very often people, they do. They come as if there is something wrong.
Right.
And so if I'm understanding your question correctly, they pathologise often something that's very normal.
Right. So they're seeing it as being something wrong, as opposed to it's just a sticking point that they need to get over, or
absolutely, or to normalise.
Or normalise.
So, for example, a lot of my experiences with couples is that certain things are happening within their sex life that they pathologise, that they make wrong.
Right.
And they've either done that through cultural programming, stereotypes around gender or sex or sexuality or what we're supposed to be like.
Yeah.
And so they have a lot of guilt and shame and even disgust about how their body is responding, without knowing that actually it's quite normal at this age or this part of your life stage, or in terms of the experiences you're having at the moment. The penises don't always work if we're psychologically distressed.
Right.
Men are not automatons or robots. They're sexual beings, human beings.
Yeah.
And so very often, a lot of what I do is about normalising,
Right.
letting people know what's normal.
So is there almost like a framework of normal or good that you work against?
I would say so. Absolutely.
And can you give us a rough sort of
So for example,
insight into
so for example, men and women will often come with regards to like sexual function. So a man may come because he feels that he's a premature ejaculator. I'm coming too quick, and so he, sits on my couch and starts to tell me about this, and then we investigate a little further, and what he's describing is actually perfectly normal. If he's got a new sexual partner, he's I've got a new sexual partner, I come really quickly the first time we have sex, and I'm going, it's pretty normal. That doesn't,
you're in that height of a relationship and you're super aroused.
It's super aroused, or just that you're not comfortable yet, a bit anxious, want to perform, a bit of pressure on you. Perfectly normal. That may happen the first few times. That's okay. Very often I'm fighting against that. That's a very good way of describing it. There's a normal framework or expectation, which is usually very unrealistic and based on myths created within our culture and society.
So is there almost like a sexual journey someone would go through in a relationship? I mean, to me, the start of it, there's the archetypal, you're at it like rabbits, so to speak.
Yes.
and then it sort of chills off a bit. I mean, can you give us an insight into that over, first couple of years, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40?
Well, we could try and put it into time frames, but to be honest, human beings are so individual and unique that we don't often always fit into time frames, and that's another thing that's quite important to let people know, that we don't all fit into these boxes. But there is definite stages within relationships that have been researched into, the initial honeymoon or limerence stage of a relationship, at it like rabbits, and feeling all those feelings, the butterflies and all of that, and that usually occurs within relationships, but that can often be quite short-lived for some people, 6 to 8 weeks for some. Some people can stretch that out to a couple of years. Some feel that they can do that for a lifetime. So there are definite stages to relationships. Whether we fit into time spans or specific ways for that to roll out is probably another question.
Yes.
And some people can move in and out of limerence, return back to it, and it's a normal biological part of a relationship to have those different emotions, very endorphin based to begin with, and then moving to your oxytocins and your pair bonding a bit more settled. Nature's way of tricking us into having babies. Or at least remaining with a partner for some time. Yeah,
and that's the stage that comes afterwards.
The limerence. Yeah, after limerence.
Yes.
Yeah, so there are life stages to relationships. We don't always follow those.
Yes.
Or do it in a linear fashion, but it's something that can be looked into and researched. Yeah, and it's really important for people to know about. It doesn't mean that I'm not meant to be with him if I don't get butterflies after a couple of years. Butterflies could just be a hormonal response.
Super. So, how did you get into this? What drew Emma to become a sexologist?
Yeah, well, it was quite an interesting journey, to be honest. I certainly didn't grow up as a small child going, oh, I'd love to be a sex therapist. Yeah. That seems like my ideal kind of job. I actually worked in education initially. I was a secondary school teacher, and I did that for some time, and I became interested in counselling. I started working with children that were very bright, but were definitely bucking the system and not doing as well as maybe they would have liked to have done. So I started working and coaching children, and I became more and more interested in counselling and hypnotherapy and psychotherapy, and I thought, oh, I'm quite interested in this, and moved into that and did further qualifications while I was in the UK. And then when I came to having my own children, I, as a hypnotherapist, I was like, must be a way of having this baby a bit easier than, how everybody talks about and all the books say. And I became interested more and more in hypnotherapy and hypnobirthing.
Yeah.
And I
reprogramming,
and had wonderful experiences in my own births. And then coming over to Australia, I trained to be hypnobirthing practitioner and doula, and I just started working more and more with women and couples and birth, and I worked over the years with probably about 3,500 couples. Right. And I noticed while I was doing that work that there was so much going on in those couples, and so much that I didn't know about.
Right.
And I was like, I don't know how to help these people. And then I started to have clients that were, probably from more sensitive groups, in terms of like they'd come from histories that were quite painful, with incidents of maybe sexual abuse or childhood sexual assault. And I really felt ill-equipped. I didn't know about this subject. I didn't know enough, certainly. So I went onto the internet, as we all do, and started looking for qualifications around sex and relationships and sexuality and birth and women's experience and women's bodies, and an agency around your body. And I found that here in WA we have qualifications around sex and sexuality, and that Curtin University offers those qualifications, and not just qualifications, but exceptionally good qualifications. So I went down that route, and it was obviously quite challenging.
In what way?
In terms of personal growth, I'd come from being a secondary school teacher in education, very mainstream, to having a whole different world opened up around sex and sexuality and gender, and fluidity, and finding out so much more about the human experience than I'd ever known. And then delving into that a little deeper with my masters, and I discovered a whole different side to myself as well.
What were some of the things you found?
I found that I definitely had some edges to myself, and my own
edges meaning
as in like I didn't necessarily understand the human experience, that I didn't fully engage with the whole experience of the human being, because in mainstream we don't talk about gender, we don't talk about fluidity of sexuality, we don't talk about different kinds of sex. We don't talk about...
What do you mean by different kinds of sex?
As in, like, there are so many forms of sex that don't necessarily include penetration, penis and vagina. There's forms of sex which don't include intercourse at all. Such as, tantric experiences, whole body orgasms, people that choose to engage in sex and sexuality that's non-penetrative, and all the different kinks and proclivities that human beings have. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't know about all this stuff. And that's what I wanted to learn, and that's what I've been learning. And I've found that it's improved my relationship with myself. It's improved my relationship with other human beings. It's given me a far more expansive understanding of the human experience than I ever would
From
have.
the viewpoint of sex.
Yeah, it completely transformed who I am and what I believe in.
And it's interesting you say that, because one of the reasons why I wanted to do this interview today was because, as I said at the start, sex is such a white elephant that sits in the room. Like, pretty much most people are at it, or thinking about it,
or want to be at it,
or want to be at it, or you know, I might be coming across as a bit of a boy, but yeah, it's present. Yet we do not talk about it.
We don't talk about it, and I think
is that?
I think it's because, coming from, you know, very mainstream environment myself, we just don't have the tools. So as a secondary school teacher, I definitely got to do the sex education with my classes, and I just remember my absolute horror of, you know, putting that condom on that banana in front of a very large group of 16-year-olds and going, oh, what am I doing here? I have no idea. And it was so biological, and so it was all about STIs, mechanical. It was about reproduction. We did a little about relationships, you know.
There's a lot to strike fear into the heart of kids.
Oh,
STIs,
pregnancy. Don't get her pregnant. Make sure you put the condom on right. And all of those things are useful.
Yeah.
But now, coming from a perspective of sexology, there's so much more to sex and sexuality, and I find now that there's so much more we can talk about in terms of consent, enthusiastic consent, in terms of boundaries, communication, relationship issues, and what you want your relationship to look like, agency and bodily autonomy or bodily integrity. There's so much more that we can teach children now in terms of sex positivity. That was never part of the world that I inhabited as a secondary school teacher.
Because I can see how, you know, because I see things from a psychological bent, from my own background of education. I can see how there's sort of views and implicit views around sex. And you talked about family of origin earlier on, that gets passed across, because, you know, you end up with that awkward birds and bees conversation with mum or dad, the talk, or you get handed a book, which is my experience, and then
many others' experiences,
and many others, yeah. And then there is the conversation at school with condoms and bananas and what have you, and it's very sterile. It's very, and this is when, you know, your formative views and beliefs and assumptions around sex are formed.
Absolutely.
Yet, is it the healthy way to start?
And that's very often why we have to investigate family origin, and what sex education went on within the household and the family. How open were people around talking around sex and gender and physiology, anatomy, because that's very often what I experience when I talk to clients, is that they haven't had a good start. Our formative years are incredibly important. You know, Freud really wasn't an idiot.
Yes.
There's so much that goes on in those very early stages with regards to our attachment, and our learning and our experience of our body and ourself and others, that influences our sexual experience later on in life. That our sexual templates really are organised, and our blueprints laid down within those first 7 to 8 years. They're incredibly important. So clients are often surprised for me to go back to those times. What's this got to do with, you know, whether my penis is erect or not? And it's actually incredibly important.
It's everything.
It is everything.
Yeah.
And you know, those very early years where our attachment is formed influences our relationships with ourselves and others. I'm fascinated by it, and I think I'll probably will
Yeah,
continue
yeah.
to be, because it's affirmed again and again through my explorations with my clients of how much it influences our perceptions of ourself, our body, our relationships with others, how sex is supposed to be, how we even talk about it. You know, so if sex isn't talked about within the household, then it becomes, you know, a taboo subject, which is both a draw,
Yes.
something exciting and naughty, but also something that can be suppressive and shameful and guilt-ridden. And all of those emotional responses influence our body and how it responds.
So, for a parent listening to this, what would make a healthy, constructive environment?
I think sex is something that's really important to think about when we're bringing up our children. And I don't necessarily mean that we need to tell them everything all in one go. The talk is not helpful. If it's going to be the only thing, then it will have to do. But I think what's a much more constructive, powerful way of teaching children about sex and gender and sexuality is drip feeding. Giving them a little bit of information openly, comfortably, easily, only as much as they need. You'll soon know when the eyes glaze over that that's probably a little too much.
Yes.
Just to let them know that it's something that's okay to talk about. That we can talk about menstruation openly, that we can talk about erections openly. It's a physical response. It doesn't mean anything has to be done. That we talk about sex positivity and children's sexuality. That they will have feelings. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need to engage with anybody else with those feelings, but we can normalise those feelings and give children much safer parameters. That they, you know, exploration can be done with themselves, which is far safer than them looking elsewhere for explorations when they're not maybe ready for that time. So I think it's really important for us to slowly drip feed information and accurate information to our children, without shame or guilt, to be informed. You know, there's a lot out there.
Is there anywhere in particular where a parent could go?
Yeah, there's a lot of
etc.?
websites like around sex positivity. So I don't necessarily need to give a specific one because I think it's important for people to find the right one for them.
Yes.
But in terms of website searches, to look at sex positivity and raising children, there's an awful lot out there with regards to that now, and there's plenty of books as well and resources around sex positivity and more positive ways of engaging with sex education. And I think in some ways we're getting there as a culture and community. There are some fabulous people in WA who do some great work on protective behaviours around children and teaching children about bodily integrity, and you know it's okay not to say no to hugging Auntie Flo if you don't want to. It's your body. So there's some really great resources out in WA and some really amazing innovative people who are coming up with some great programmes around children and their sexuality.
How, just changing tack slightly, how do you see, we talked about the fact that sex is still one of these things that we don't have sort of more real, genuine conversations with those around us with. However, more and more and more with the advent of the internet and advertising and what have you, sex is like thrown out and in our face all over the place. I mean, with the proliferation of the internet has come the proliferation of pornography in all shapes and sizes. And now we have, you know, apps like Tinder and where we can hookups and things like this. How is that influencing, from what you see, people's perception of sex? Because it's always going from, to me it seems kind of strange, it's almost like this taboo subject, yet it's out there in the open, but we don't have a real conversation about it at the same time, which seems kind of perverse to me.
I think perverse is an interesting word. There is a dichotomy within our sexuality culturally and socially, that we do have so much out there, and porn can be such a wonderful tool It can enable people to explore their sexuality, to find out new things, to normalize the things that they're interested in. So it can be, you know, a wonderful tool, and there's some great porn out there, lots of sex positive porn.
I have to ask, what
feminist porn?
What defines good porn?
I think again, that's a really interesting question. But I suppose from perspective of a sex therapist, somebody like myself, good porn is something where consent is really important. So very often you'll see very clear consent in some pornography, where there's negotiations before the event about what we're going to do, what sort of games we're going to play, what's okay, what's not okay, what do I like, what don't I like. So there can be some really good models of healthy sexuality in some porn, where you can see clear negotiations, where you can see clear consent, where at the end of the shoot, the porn scene, that people are very obviously comfortable with what's occurred. And happy. So, you know, that could be a really good model for people to see. Being able to see, you know, certain kinks or proclivities or fetishes being normalised, that this is okay, you can do this, and you can do this safely and consensually, and it's you know, it's a healthy thing to do. So there is good porn,
right?
Where it has a structure, and there is, you know, clear guidance, where people can say, oh yeah, that's a great way of doing that. That's great. Look, they're all enthusiastic, and they're consenting, and they're negotiating, and there's no shame. This is a good positive thing to do. Bad porn, I don't like the word good or bad, and any dichotomy.
Productive, less productive.
Yes, but in terms of how it's influencing our culture, pornography is affecting our culture.
In what way?
Well, there's quite a lot of studies around it, or at least they're coming about. You know, there's whole areas of study like cyber psychology now, where people are studying the impact of social media and other media outlets and forums, and how that's influencing the way we think. You know, how people are experiencing things like FOMO, the fear of missing out, where they have unrealistic expectations of themselves and others based on the Instagram phenomena. And porn is having similar effects. That it is becoming so mainstream that we're seeing its influences, particularly on younger groups within our community. There's already been data around, you know, how sexual behaviours are starting to change, how more, you know, certain behaviours are becoming normalised or being encouraged. We're even, you know, seeing some negative physical things that are occurring within some of our younger parts of our community, in terms of like encouraging younger girls to have anal sex when maybe they're not necessarily ready for that, or they don't know how to do it safely. And you know, there's been some instances of like anal tears and things like that in young girls, where they're engaging in maybe acts that they don't necessarily know enough about, or necessarily are comfortable with.
Yeah.
So and that may be because of the watching porn, or maybe that it's just maybe talked more about, or it's taboo. I think further investigation needs to occur, but we are seeing effects of porn, and from a viewpoint of as a sex therapist, the effects of porn that I see within my clients' experiences is very unrealistic expectations of themselves.
Right.
How long they should last, whether they should be erect every time, you know, what sort of things they should be enjoying, how big their penis should be, how wet she should be, whether she should squirt or not. You know, body image is affected by lots and lots of porn that has, you know, models or very young people with augmentations, or even, you know, vaginal changes and
Yeah.
like labioplasty and things like that. So women are seeing unrealistic models
Both men and women.
and so are men. Yeah, so that can affect self-esteem and body image and expectation of yourself and others.
Yeah, I guess if you're continually seeing this external message and source of what things should be like, if you view porn to be should be like, then yeah, that can impact and influence and shape thoughts and behaviours at all ages, I suppose.
Absolutely, and if you're watching a particular type of porn and it doesn't resemble your partnered sex at all, then that can also cause conflicts and changes in desire and changes in physical response. So I think porn is an enormous area of investigation that it's still very hotly debated within sexology. Even the subject of porn addiction. Does it exist? Doesn't exist? Is there such a thing as porn addiction, or are we just pathologizing something that can be healthy? Is this just a stress relief for some people, or is this an actual addiction? We still have a lot of questions in sexology, and I suppose that's what's so exciting about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose porn addiction is interesting. If you see a film like Damage or something like that, where the guy can no longer connect in a relationship, he's stuck with his computer or with a prostitute.
Yeah, and I mean that is somebody's lived experience. I definitely hear those stories where people are finding that they're disconnecting from their partners or from women. They find it difficult to engage. They are spending a lot more time in front of the computer. But I also hear stories where they're able to do that in a perfectly healthy way, and it relieves stress and gives them, ideas and thoughts and fantasies that are healthy and positive. So I think it's something, again, we shouldn't generalise about.
Yes.
It's important to look at the individual experience and how they respond to stimulus. That we're far too unique and individual for a generalisation to be made.
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting to look at it from an individual point of view and ask yourself, certainly if you're a listener here, what is there shame in this? Are you investigating? Are you not? Have you been sitting in front of the computer a bit too much? Should you turn back to your partner? And just, rather than sticking the layer of shame over it because it's come from our family of origin, sit and look at yourself and what is the drive and where are you going? Recognise that and see where it's going. Yeah,
is this just a healthy mechanism for coping with stress, or is there some compulsivity and discomfort in here? Yeah, and it's the same with sex. And sex addiction.
Yes.
Again, the addict word. Is this something that I just do because it's a coping mechanism? Do I have sex with multiple partners because I feel, driven to do it, but I feel a sense of shame every time I do it, or do I do it and it helps me relieve my stress and get on with my day, and that I have positive experiences?
That's interesting then. So where is the, I'm going to say boundary, but where's the difference lie between sitting in front of the computer and masturbating or being compelled to have sex with lots of people, against sex as an intimate act between two people? That all of a sudden, just sitting and listening to you here, it's like, oh, now we've got a range of uses for sex.
Yeah, and that's really healthy, that sex isn't just put into a box. Oh, sex should look like this, because lots of people have lots of different experiences of sex, and if we put things into boxes, where do they go in those boxes? There's so many different expressions of sex and sexuality and gender, that how is it possible that we can put people into these boxes? Does sex need to be an intimate experience with two people, or can it be a casual experience with four? Is there anything negative about that? Well, if everybody's consenting, enthusiastic and happy about the experience, of course it's a positive experience. So it's starting to break down those small boxes and looking at the human being and their experience and their lived experience,
Yes.
and how they feel about it, and how their partner or partners feel about it, which seems, is it just for fun? Is it okay that it's just for fun and pleasure? Of course. Is it okay if it's for procreation? Of course.
Yeah, functional versus recreational.
Is it okay that we, salve an argument? Salve an argument with sex?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Make-up sex. Make his day better sex.
Yeah.
Make her day better sex. Is that okay? Yes. Yeah.
It's fascinating, actually. It's just open up. You talked about sex as part of the human experience, and coming into this, I was sort of like thinking, there's, like I just said, there's functional and recreational, but then, how do you? So, for somebody who spent time looking at this, do you see sex as part of the whole human experience?
Absolutely, and that doesn't necessarily mean penetrative intercourse with another person. Sex can be with yourself, can be an expression of self, and doesn't have to have anything to do with penetration. There's so many different forms of sex. Somebody might choose to have sex while wearing their high heels and never touch their clitoris. There's so many different forms of sex and sexuality. And some people choose to express their sex and sexuality without desire and arousal. There's a different form. Some people are asexual. We have so many different expressions of self, and it's really important to know all about them and to see them as all valid and important, and that they are a lived experience of an individual. They don't have to be in that frame.
Do you research and interview or investigate further any philosophies from like Eastern and Oriental type countries with chi and energy flow and stuff like that?
I've certainly have read about it. I think it's important to read about all different cultural experiences of sex and sexuality, and to have some understanding of those.
You mentioned the different types of sex, and you mentioned tantric earlier on. Certainly I've read stuff about chi and energy transfer. I wondered if
it's not necessarily something that I might do within therapy, but it would be an avenue that I would encourage people to investigate if it's something that interests them. I think there's so many different forms of interest that it would be foolish to negate any, and so I think each culture brings its own norms around sex and sexuality, and they all play a part within different individuals' lives. So I think, yes, absolutely, it's something that people could explore, and can be very beneficial for some people and not for others.
Yeah.
So it's knowing that there should be an investigation of one's sexuality, and that there's so many avenues that we can go down, and that it's part of my job as a sex therapist to enable options. This is something you can try. Well, this is, there's this workshop here, or this lady does this, or this guy does this. There's so many individuals involved in sex and sexuality within our community of so many different types that people really can, have scope for exploration.
And is this what you learn when you go and do a master's in sexology? Open-mindedness to go and investigate further beyond the actual masters itself.
It's very much an encouragement into the non-binary.
Right.
That we don't need to move into dichotomies and rigidity. That fluidity within the human experience is something that is key, paramount. That we can move between different interests to different relationship structures. We can move in and out of cultural norms. And that's very much encouraged within sexology, is that more expansive view of the human experience. That there doesn't need to be binary, male, female, man, woman, monogamy, non-monogamy. There are so many other spheres that we can investigate.
Mm.
So yeah, absolutely, that expansion and broadening of our understanding of sexuality was very, very important, both in my postgraduate and my master's.
If you look across Western Australia, what are some of the things that you would like to see, or if you could wave a magic wand, what would help us as a state to, let's say, improve our relationship with sex?
I think there's amazing groups and communities within WA that are already doing that. Such as in the LGBTQI community. There's so much going on with young people, with people who are determining their sexuality, with people who are determining their gender. We have amazing groups regarding gender, sexuality, being queer. There's so much out there in terms of resources, groups, Facebook groups, forums. There's access to counselling around sexuality, even for quite young people here in WA. But there's also
what about less young people,
and for older groups as well. You know, there's some great resources for seniors as well within the LGBTQI community, which previously we hadn't had. WA is actually incredibly inclusive in terms of the groups and resources available, and you can easily find them on the internet if it's something that you're interested in. But also in WA, there's not just public resources, but there's also a lot of private groups and organisations with regards to sexuality in terms of the kink community.
Kink meaning?
Kink is in like that's a whole big topic as well. So in terms of people who have particular proclivities or interests, whether it's in bondage or BDSM, or whether they want to incorporate some tantra with some BDSM, there's incredible groups that are open within the community in WA, whether you want to learn to do some shibari, some rope work, and tie up your partner. Tie up your partner, you want to do that beautifully. There's groups in WA that you can investigate that with safely and well, and there's groups where you can investigate, non-monogamous relationships. There's meet-up groups for people who are in polyamorous or open relationships, or non-monogamous or monogamish relationships. There's so much out there within WA. It's an incredibly expansive and inclusive community, which you don't necessarily think of when you first think of WA.
No, you off the top of your head, you think it's quite conservative and closed.
But that's there is space for exploration here in WA. It's, I do, as I said at the beginning of our interview, I love the people of WA because they are so interesting in terms of how open they can be.
Yes.
There is, an availability of resources for people of all different descriptions.
Where would somebody, let's say, midlife person in a relationship, because the topic, the areas you've spoken to, they're quite specific, and the yes vote and everything, it's been very much in the media, and so it's now become more socially acceptable to talk about being gay or lesbian or whatever. But if you were just like your run-of-your-mill middle class 40-year-old person in a 10, 15, 20 year relationship, or etc., where would you go from there?
In terms of like exploration,
exploring and improving your relationship with sex and your partner.
So I mean, obviously the internet, books, resources can be a space to explore, but I think probably the first thing to do is to explore yourself And that's what most people don't do within a relationship. They focus on exploring their partner, or they focus on exploring other people, or they focus on exploring the internet before they even explore themselves.
Yes.
They have no idea what they like, what turns them on, what they fancy, what they don't fancy, what bit likes being touched, what bit doesn't like being touched, how it likes to be touched. And that, I find, is usually the first step. How much have you actually explored yourself, your own sense of who you are, and your own sense of your sexuality and what you might like? And that's very often people are quite surprised by that response, because they'll talk about sexual desire and whether they fancy their partner, and they say, well, how's your relationship with you? Like, oh, what do you mean? Oh, how often do you touch yourself? How often are you exploring yourself? Do you know what you like? Do you know what you don't like? Oh. And so it's interesting how we very often externalise and look for interests outside of ourselves before we've even done any self-exploration. And that's so important to find out about ourselves before we engage with others.
I think one of the things I'm finding by doing more and more of these podcasts and looking at different avenues is this theme of come back to yourself, to understand yourself, not before but at the same time as exploring the external world at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's a really important step to take. We often move very hastily towards externalisation before we have an understanding of ourselves.
And playing by life scripts, and then getting to a place of expectation and achieving that, and then sitting there and going, it's not quite as fulfilling as I thought.
No. Yeah. So I think I'm glad that people are coming to that with your podcasts, because I think it's something we want to encourage from a very early age, for children to explore themselves first. Who are they? What do they like? What are their boundaries? What do they not like? And for them to be able to talk about that and articulate it, and let the world know before they move to externalisation and exploration of others before they even know themselves.
So when you decided to become a sexologist, what was the impact you wanted to have?
So I think primarily the reason I went into sexology was that I wanted to help others, that I was working with couples and particularly women in their birthing experience, and as I said, I wasn't equipped to deal with certain parts of that, and so the impact that I would like to continue to have is to help others navigating their experience of themselves and their world, and to make that a positive experience, whether that is harm minimization, or whether that is showing them options, or exploring what fits them best. But also, I suppose, in terms of impact, my main interest is probably around women's sexuality, and women's sexual response, and that was very much where my master's went. That was focusing on women's sexual responses.
That was your thesis?
That was my thesis, yeah. So my thesis was on female ejaculation and women's experience of that. And again, a real focus of my interest is the lived experience of human beings, not what people say we should be, or what the books tell us we should do, or what society says we should be doing, or how it should be and how it should feel, but what do actual human beings experience? And I suppose my impact is that I want to listen to real stories from human beings, find out what their story is, not what my story is, or the story that I want to impute upon them, but what is their story. And so my impact is less about myself, although it is an exploration of myself at the same time, but more about enabling others to find out more about themselves, and for me to learn as well at the same time about the human condition and the sexuality of us as a human species. and then from that to let other people know.
Yes.
As much as I am able to go, that's such an interesting story. That's such a good, piece of information you've handed me there. Can I let other people know that? Can I pass on that information? Can I expand on that? Can we start to demolish those myths, those unrealistic expectations? Can I normalise for people what their experience may be like rather than what they think it should be like? So for example, female ejaculation, very often partners of women who can ejaculate assume that it's an orgasmic experience that's pleasurable, and so as soon as it happens, he or she sees it and goes, oh, she's come, it's great, amazing, and they stop playing because that's the orgasmic response. But that's not necessarily what women are telling me in their stories. They're telling me that sometimes you can just press the right place and it squirts out and that's what happens, but it doesn't feel great. In fact, it just feels like I want to wee. I'm not having an orgasm, and then everybody just stops playing.
Right, and so there's the difference between ejaculation and orgasm.
Yeah, and so that wouldn't be garnered if I hadn't spent listening and exploring with women what their actual story is rather than what we assume it to be.
It probably ties into something you mentioned quite early on in this about the whole body orgasm.
Exactly. We have so many different experiences. We can have so many different orgasms. We can have so many bodily sensations. We can orgasm or not orgasm. But does that mean we don't have any pleasure or experience? No, there's lots of in-betweens. So I think it's really important to investigate those in-betweens and to normalise them.
So the thing that's coming out to me at the moment is almost like a celebration of being in this physical body and all the great stuff it can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not talking about swimming to a rock nest or doing an Ironman or something like that, which is obvious physical like sport exercise. This is actually just being quite still, maybe or maybe not, and just enjoying how it works in your particular body. Or
it is a celebration and exploration of the body, however that may be, because there's so many different types of bodies too, and so many people have different experiences of their bodies, whether that's a mental, psychological experience of their body, or whether it's a physical experience of our body. Our body changes throughout our life stages, and our body may change through injury or surgery. We're all born differently. We have different abilities. We have different experiences of mobility or understanding of our gender within our body. There's so much variation that it is definitely a celebration of all of those variations, that we can explore ourselves and our sexuality however we might be, and all of those can be celebrated, and there's a journey for everyone.
Yes.
And everybody has a right to that journey.
Yes, I like that. Going back to your impact and what you were saying before, you've obviously turned this into your business now. How's that little journey been in terms of coming out of the masters and setting up the business? I mean, how do you market yourself as a sexologist?
Yeah,
how do you get clients?
So, I mean, luckily I had been a therapist for quite some time, so I already had much of that organised, and in terms of the business side of things. But in terms of marketing, yes, that's been an interesting journey, because of course with something like sex and sexuality, when you first come out there as a sex therapist, most people are like, well, what does this mean? What do you do?
That's one of the first questions I asked you.
Yeah, and very often I'll still get email inquiries like, what sort of therapy is this? Will there be touch? Do we get naked? Will you be touching me? Will I be touching you?
Is it like that Faulty Towers clip?
So it's in terms of marketing, you know, I had to be very clear with regards to what I do.
Yes.
You know, this is talk therapy. You know, I'm somebody who's coming from an academic background. If you need somebody that way you want to be naked and touch and do touching, then, you know, there are people that can help you.
That's not me.
But that's not me. And I'm not going to shame you for that. And I'll even help you with, you know, where to go and what internet site to look at. But in terms of marketing, I had to be very clear about what I did. That this is talk therapy. It's counselling, psychoeducation, psychotherapy. That we're using sexological techniques. So we'll be talking through exercises, and then you'll do them at home with yourself or your partner or partners. And so once that was clear, and it was very, very easy to find the clients that were going to come to me, and it was easy for them to find me as well. So that was all that needed to be done. Clear parameters. This is what I do, and in terms of my modalities, because I also use hypnotherapy and NLP, there will be, you know, clients that will be interested in that, and then they go, oh yeah, I want some hypnotherapy. Oh yeah, this person does it around sex and sexuality. Oh, there's not too many.
Becomes a niche.
Yeah, people that do that. And I think it's important to include, you know, a variety of modalities for people to access their journey. That it's, you know, it can be incredibly powerful to use something like NLP or hypnotherapy with a client who's got a blockage around sex and sexuality, because so much of it is within the subconscious, within those formative years, within those very early blueprints, where, you know, hypnotherapy has such an impact. So to go back to your question about how did I start that journey, I don't know if there was a start.
Right.
I think it was just a movement through initially working as a, you know, counselling, coaching, using hypnotherapy with children, then moving into birth work and working with women, and then sexuality. It was more an evolution, a rolling on, in terms of my business as well. It was just an add-on, as it were. But then, of course, I became far more interested in sex and sexuality. It's, I would say, definitely engulfed majority of my being.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been part of my journey as a therapist as well.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, sitting here, listening and watching you talk about it, you're obviously very excited and
Totally.
and passionate about it. How has your journey as a therapist changed in terms of, you know, as you've learned and gone along, and what have you learned about yourself and things like that?
I've learned so much from people around me. I learn from my clients continuously. I learn from other therapists. So I have very clear communications with quite a large number of other therapists involved in the field, within counselling, within hypnotherapy. I've learned so much from my supervisors. So as you know, as somebody who's a clinical hypnotherapist, I have, you know, it's very important that I have supervision. So I had supervision with supervisors that are qualified in hypnotherapy, but I also probably my most important part of my journey as a therapist is through my supervision with the Society for Australian Sexologists, with SAS. They are, you know, an incredible group of people that have such a clear knowledge and understanding. So in terms of the question with regards to my being a therapist and what I've learned, is that I would say that the most I've learned is from clients and other therapists. Yeah, and it's changed me.
In what ways?
Such experiences with such a broad range of clients.
Because it's really putting yourself out there, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's personal humility is so important, that I will learn from them as much as they will learn from me. That they are there to, you know, tweak any curveballs that I might need to work on. They give me areas of thought. They're like, oh, I never thought of that before. You know,
you might get a physiological response to what you're hearing. Like,
yeah.
What's that?
What's that about? You know,
think about that afterwards.
I'll think about it, and I'll go and research it, and I'll find out more. That a lot of my work includes reading enormous amounts of articles and books. I'm constantly reading. Often sparked by a client with, I've got this, this disability, or I've got this genetic variation, or this has come up for me, or this physical response has occurred for me, or I'm taking this medication. I need to go and find out about those things. So it's a continual learning process, and my supervisors enable me to do that. And of course, as a therapist, you make mistakes. You make big mistakes. And there will be quite significant failures. And therapeutic failure is definitely part of your journey.
How do you deal with that?
I think you deal with it as a human, which is that you go, oh, what did I learn from that experience? That of course it won't always be successful. There will be many opportunities where I can help people. There'll be many opportunities where I can provide normalisation and education and strategies and tools and techniques. I can do that, but also there may be times where I won't hit the nail on the head, where I won't be able to investigate that as effectively as maybe was needed, but also that maybe that person's not ready for therapy. Maybe that it's not time. Maybe I'm not the right therapist, and that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay, because they will learn something from that experience about what's right for them and what's not right for them. And I will learn from that experience. That's something that you need to work on.
So if we look to the next 5 or 10 years, what does the future hold for Emma? What does success look like going forward?
Success. That's an interesting word, success. The future looks to me very, very much as it does at the moment. I'm very happy with the work that I do. I have amazing clients, and every new client that comes my way has been such an amazing learning experience. So I'm hoping for very much of the same. I'm very, very much interested in continuing my work with female ejaculation and investigating women's sexuality. I'd love to continue that research. I'm currently working on a book on premature ejaculation for men and their partner and all partners, and that's something that I really would like to finish at some point. So I think that would be a good focus. I think men's sexuality is, has been explored very well. I think there's still room for putting all the bits together. And I'm hoping as well to continue my work with the hypnotherapy and help to train others in hypnotherapy as well. So there's a lot that I'm looking forward to. In terms of success, I very much feel I'm in a space where I want to be. So I'm just hoping for that to continue, really. Yeah.
Right.
Finding out more, learning more.
If you could go back to speak to Emma at the start of her journey, when she decided to become a therapist, and before she embarked on it, what piece of advice would you give her?
Just keep going, it's amazing. It's going to be good. Yeah, it will be a roller coaster. You're going to have to change and shift a lot. You're going to have to bend your edges and learn more about humans and their experience, and that's okay. And it's going to be a very rewarding journey. Yeah. So I just give her some advice to keep going. This is going to be good.
And for somebody out there who's considering becoming a therapist, what piece of advice would you give them?
To really do their research around getting a good solid base, to find what sort of therapist they want to be. Do they want to focus on counselling? Do they want a few modalities? I think it's really important to find the right people for you in terms of giving you that solid qualification basis, whether that's in counselling or psychotherapy, and what sort of approach you want to take. And to really get your network of other therapists around you, that there's so much knowledge here in WA. There's incredible people within, you know, the field, and that we have so much to learn from each other. So I think I would encourage them to get a good solid basis, whether that, you know, that's in terms of theory or strategies, that is garnered. So important when it comes to the journey of dealing with human beings. We do need a clear understanding of psychology, a clear understanding of behaviours, a clear understanding of cognition to be able to be an effective therapist, to understand about families of origin.
Yes. Because
if you don't have that grounding, where do you need to work from the ground up?
Yeah.
To get an understanding of that human being, and that, you know, the model that we use in sexuality is the biological, the social, the cultural, the physiological, the psychological. There's so much to it. Yeah, we need that grounding, and we need our mentors as well.
So, if someone's listened to this and they want to come and get in touch, how can they find you?
So normally most people find me through the internet.
Yeah.
So through my website, Stewart Therapies, and that's usually the best way to get hold of me. Yeah.
Superb. Well, Emma, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today.
No, you're really welcome.
It's been an absolute mind and perspective opening conversation, even for, well, not even for me, for me particularly, and I'm pretty sure any of my listeners will be given so much to think about.
Oh, great!
If you actually sit and think about what we've talked about in terms of the role that sex plays within our human experience, celebration of being in our body, how our past and our family of origin plays into it, and how it closes things off or opens things out, and there's just so much to think about.
Oh, there is.
I can't thank you enough for today.
No, I really enjoyed today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank
Cheers.
Would you like a glass of water?